Of Blood and Steel, written by Seymour Zainali, narrated by James Lawrence. Chapter 10. Walking in Circles. As they walked farther, Balak spotted smoke in the distance. He thought about pointing it out to Arda, but she'd been quiet and distant since they parted company with Zia. "Is that a fire?" Arda asked. "No," Balak retorted. Are you sure? There's a lot of smoke." "My instincts tell me this has to be something else." He tried to reassure her. They headed toward the smoke, and as they drew closer they saw a man sitting on a one-legged stool next to a charcoal kiln. He looked weary, and he blinked slowly, locking his lids together for several seconds. His stool wobbled, and he opened his eyes with a jump. He was startled when he first noticed Balak, but when he spotted Arda, he relaxed a little. "Can you point us in the direction of Balak?" Balak asked him. "You're close. Keep following the path, and in around half a kilometer you'll see it." "Balak?" Arda questioned, but Balak had already started walking toward the city. "Thank you, sir," Arda said. She turned and walked quickly to catch up to Balak. "Balak!" she yelled, grabbing his arm. He looked at her. "What?" "Balak is not on our way to the Iron Gates." "We need rest and supplies." "I suppose you're correct." They walked along, and just as the man had said, the city came into sight. Farmers plowed their land with two large bulls. They stopped and wiped their foreheads before starting again. They didn't seem to notice Balak and Arda. A boy walked around and collected the animal shit. He chucked it into his bucket. He noticed them, scrunched up his face, and smiled at Arda before running off to collect more. The glint of the sun caught the spire of the tall wooden watchtowers. There was still a cool nip in the air, and Balak and Arda could see their breath. Just outside the city walls there were dozens of people camping. They were huddled together, and one little boy was sipping from a bowl. "Where do these people come from?" Arda questioned. "Refugees. They must have arrived from a nearby city," Balak replied. Balak noticed a butcher cutting a bull for meat. His table was etched with many blade marks from years of work and unwelcome thieves. He examined the animal and carved every part. The butcher used every part of that animal, even its tongue and penis. Nothing went to waste. Arda admired the market for a moment before noticing a fight that had broken out between a refugee and a local seller. "They must be fighting over their place in the market," she told Balak. Balak looked around and saw a candle-shaped candy hanging on a string. He'd seen them before, but not in those colors, red and green, never so bright. "Look!" He pointed them out to Arda. "Have you not seen a churchkela before?" "I have, but not in those colors. I thought you would find it interesting, too." "They say if you live in Elbrus, you've seen half of Tartaurus. This is nothing I have ever seen," Arda said. Finally they arrived at the towering wooden gates of Balak. The walls of the city comprised horizontally stacked wooden poles with hollow holes in them. Arda stared at the graffiti and engravings of ancient symbols that told stories of the city. Arda started to read the wall. Some were names of lovers, while others were related to the maker. Some of the graffiti was not old, but insulted the native people, lords, and pictures that had first been there. The gravelly ground was harsh on the soles of their shoes. Balak walked tall and looked around. The gray furs he'd taken from the bandits suited him. Arda hid under her shawl with the child. She dragged her feet and stumbled. They'd been traveling south for several days. "We should find a place to rest," she suggested. The inner city was highly populated. Several men were working to improve the city walls and defenses. To the left, a small crowd huddled around two men who were wrestling. Balak reminisced about the pit and Georgi shouting for him to get out. They headed past a link maker. He wiped the sweat from his brow and went back into the heat, hammering and shaping the chainmail armor for soldiers. "You think they are preparing to protect or to invade?" Arda asked Balak. "One thing is certain. Blood will be spilled," he told her. "It's getting dark. We need to find somewhere to stay." They searched for a place to stay, but most of the taverns were full. They turned down an old, filthy alley filled with rubbish. It led them into an open area with lots of small huts. It was much cleaner than the alley. A woman was sitting on the ground with a small barrel, scrubbing clothes spotless, while some children played in the street. At the end of the street, they rounded the corner and arrived at a small old tavern. Balak twisted the brass handle and headed inside. "Sit down and rest. I'll do the talking," Balak said. He headed over to the bar. "I need a room," he demanded. The girl nodded and muttered something under her breath, but Balak couldn't understand what she was saying. He looked around the small tavern. It was quiet. 3 old men sat in the corner, playing cards. The innkeeper came in to meet Balak. "I need a room," he said. The innkeeper spoke in the Laverian language. "Fuck me, do you speak the common tongue?" Balak asked. The innkeeper replied in Laverian. Balak began to scream at the man when Arda rushed over to sort things out. "Balak, let me try," she told him. "Do you speak Laverian?" he asked her incredulously. "A little." Arda spoke to the innkeeper. "Forgive my friend, he is easily irritated. We would like to get a room."
"Then you better look somewhere else. I don't accept refugees into my establishment," he told Arda.
"We are not refugees. We can pay for the room."
"Money in advance." "What's he saying?"
Balak asked Arda. "He says we can stay."
"Good. Let's eat first, and tell him to make it quick. I don't like the tone of his voice," Balak growled.
"Can we get something to eat?" Arda asked the innkeeper.
"You are welcome to get served, as long as you have silver," he told Arda.
Arda pulled a few coins out of her bag and slapped them onto the bar. The innkeeper grabbed them without hesitation and slipped them into his pocket.
"Go and find yourself a seat. I will get you food and drinks."
"I saw a river nearby. Can we get a fish and milk for the child?" Arda asked, and opened her cloak to reveal the child. The innkeeper nodded. "He said yes," Arda said to Balak.
"Yeah, I got that part,"
Balak growled. Balak and Arda sat down and waited. The innkeeper's daughter brought Balak a jug of ale and Arda a glass of water. She also handed over some milk. "I warmed the milk a little for you." "Thank you," Arda said. She untied the sling from her neck, but she had to fumble with the knot for a while, as she felt frail from exhaustion. As soon as the child tasted the milk, she guzzled and guzzled, slurping and slapping her lips.
"Ah!"
Balak sighed after taking a large swig of his ale. He looked gaunt, but the ale added some color to his cheeks.
"Finally."
Arda nodded, but stayed silent. Once the baby was fed, Arda laid her back down. She was content and ecstatic. "Here is your buckwheat," a female voice squeaked to Arda. It was the young girl from the bar. She bowed her head and scurried off, tiptoeing like a tiny mouse. The tavern master followed, carrying a fish. He placed it on the table, and Balak jumped to his feet. He shoved the table forward and grabbed the tavern master by the throat. His ale spilled over the table and ran into the buckwheat, ruining their meals. "Father!" the innkeeper's daughter screamed. "Balak!" Arda gasped. "What's gotten into you?"
"You dare to insult me like this?"
he spat. Arda put her hand on Balak's arm. "Balak, people are staring at us. Let the man go, now!" Balak looked around and then at Arda. He let go of the man and pushed him back before storming out of the tavern. The daughter of the tavern master rushed to her father's arms. The tavern owner came over to Arda.
"This is a peaceful establishment. Leave immediately."
"I'm so sorry. I'll pay for any damages," Arda said to the man. "My grandfather didn't mean it. There won't be any more trouble. I promise." She took out some more coin and offered it to the man. He snatched it.
"You and your grandfather may stay, but keep him restrained. Put a leash on him if you must," he retorted. "Your friend is a Carbadian,"
a voice behind Arda said. She turned around and saw one of the old men who was playing nards earlier. "I thought they were gone," Arda said almost in a whisper as she processed the implications. She paid for the damages and went outside to talk to Balak. "They're happy to let us stay for a week," she told him. Balak had settled down and was sitting on some hay. "Balak, we need to talk."
"Does it have to do with what just happened?"
"Yes."
"Then no."
"You are Carbadian. Is that why you took it as an insult?" Balak sat in silence. "Why didn't you tell me?"
"It didn't seem to matter."
Balak took a bite of his carcho. "Why doesn't your kind eat fish?"
"You wouldn't get it."
"Try me," she insisted, placing a chair across from him and sitting to listen. Balak finished his food and took a deep breath before speaking again.
"My people were known for many things, but killing is what we did best. For centuries, my ancestors raided the neighboring kingdoms, but everything changed when King Livon of Amida, alongside Ilania and Tavlin, invaded Karbad. After the collapse of the Carbadian Empire, men, women, and children were put in cages or sold into slavery. A significant number died of starvation. The dead were chopped into pieces. Their remains were scattered into the lakes and rivers across Tartaurus. The rest of Tartarus would call it justice, but we called it cleansing. Eating fish would entail eating my ancestors. I may not be proud of my people's history, but they didn't deserve to be slaughtered like animals."
Balak barely slept that night. He sat quietly by the door, finishing off his ale while Arda slept. "It's a little early, isn't it, even for you?" Arda asked as she stretched and rose from her bed. Over the next few days, Balak spent his time wandering the streets of Kalak, asking about Marie Kardav. He visited the places Georgi had talked about, but none of the citizens could remember the name Kardav. It was like the Kardavs were non-existent, just a memory lost in time. He headed through the marketplace and into a part of town he hadn't checked yet. The dark streets of the town felt no safer here than they did in the hollow. Beggars sat on the ground, holding out old bowls in hopes of receiving silver. Balak spotted a busy tavern. 2 drunks were brawling outside the door, but they were stumbling with every punch, unable to deliver a blow. They slurred verbal insults to one another before passing out on the ground. Balak entered the tavern, and it was packed. The noise level was intense as people jeered, cheered, and argued. The whole place smelled of stale ale and fermented eggs. Balak asked around about the Kardavs.
"There's a name I haven't heard in a long time,"
one man said. He twizzled his curly white beard.
Georgi left town, but his old lady died a few years back. The girl left, I think." "Left? Tell me where she went,"
Balak demanded, but the man did not answer.
"Will you give me the answer, or do I have to beat it out of you?"
The next minute, the old man's head hit the table, and he let out a ferocious snore. Balak was ready to storm out of the establishment when a voice behind him said,
"If you're looking for anything in this town, you better talk to Russo."
Balak turned around and saw a short old man who didn't fit in with the rest of the crowd.
"And where do I find Russo?"
The man pointed down the street toward the city's bathhouse. Balak left the tavern and again passed through the dark streets. As he got closer to the bathhouse, he saw some women outside, all with long, straight hair, brunettes, blondes, raven-haired women, and even redheads.
"I'm looking for Marie Kardav. Do you know of her?"
he asked a group of them.
"For a few silver coins, I could be your Marie Daddy,"
the tallest woman replied. The other two laughed along, but Balak pushed through them and headed inside. He was met with hot air hitting his face. Some drunken men who looked like knights were sipping ale, mead, and cider, and were calling over women.
"Show us your duckies,"
they yelled, and after they'd all had a feel of exposed breasts, they flicked a silver coin and moved on to the next girl. Balak pushed away the women who approached him, refusing to touch their breasts or kiss them. One woman tried to touch him, but Balak grabbed her hand and exclaimed, "No!" The insulted woman started to shout at him in Laverian. This drew more attention to Balak, and men started to whisper about him in Laverian. As he passed them, they shouted what must have been insults. They roared with laughter that filled the establishment.
"What did he say?"
Balak asked some of the women, but they just mimicked the sounds of sheep and goats, which confused Balak even more.
"Can I help you with anything?"
a voice said.
"I don't speak Laverian. What do they say?"
"It's probably best to ignore those people and just talk to me. What brings you here?"
the hostess asked.
"I'm looking for Russo. I've been sent here."
"That is a person in charge here. Do you have an appointment?"
"No."
"Then you are going to have to wait, like everyone else."
The hostess linked arms with Balak and walked him to the bar. Balak waited and sipped ale. Each time he finished his cup, the barmaid refilled it and held out her hand for coin. After 3 cups, Balak refused, but the barmaid refilled it and held out her hand. He paid her, but this time he left the cup full, so she couldn't refill it. After a while, the hostess returned and gestured for Balak to follow her to Russo. The door opened, and the silhouette of a towering and fit person appeared in the corner of the room.
"Hello? I'm looking for Russo. The women told me—"
"Get inside and lock the door behind you,"
a voice coming from the silhouette said. Balak reached for the door when the voice continued,
"And leave your axe outside. You're scaring the visitors."
Balak hesitated, but did as requested. He handed his axe to one of the women and watched her leave. He had very little time to find Marie and was willing to take the risk.
"I thought this was a bathhouse," he asked.
"It is, on paper. Now, tell me, what brings you here?"
"I mean no harm. I did exactly as you asked me. I would appreciate it if you revealed yourself."
A woman left the shadows and sat on the throne-like chair opposite Balak.
"I would like to speak to Russo. Is he here?"
he asked.
"Then speak."
"You are Russo,"
Balak deduced.
"Expecting someone else?"
"The name sounded male."
"Did you come all the way here to discuss my name?"
"No. I'm looking for Marie Kardav."
"Marie. The name does sound familiar, pondered Rousseau.
Do you know where she is?
I might not.
Would you be able to help me find her?
I will do no such thing.
If it's coin you want, then I can give you a silver coin for your troubles. What do you say?
Balak proposed.
Sweetie, you can give me all the coins in Tartarus, and I still wouldn't bring you Marie, especially not after that stunt you pulled at the tavern.
The word got around.
The old rumor mill keeps spinning, Balak.
How do you know my name?
I didn't. I heard stories, and you fit the description. You don't often come around a man of your stature. I'm curious. Why would the terror of Tartarus show up at my doors?
Rousseau speculated.
I already told you. I'm looking for Marie.
Then who is the girl with you?
That's not for you to know.
Aggressive? Interesting. No worries. Your secret is safe with me.
Does this mean you will help me?
You won't find help here. Not from me, at least.
I'll be waiting at the bar if you change your mind.
Don't bother. You're not drinking here. You're scaring away my customers. If you wish to stay, you can do so outside.
Balak waited most of the day for Rousseau to help him, but nothing. He watched men and women coming in and out of the place as day turned into night, but he never saw Rousseau leave the tavern. Balak paced outside. He looked around and found a back door leading to a dark, narrow alley. When he checked the door, he found it locked. As he turned to head back to his lodging, he heard screaming from the other end of the alley. He turned and saw a man forcing himself on a young lady.
I just want a kiss, Muska,
the man croaked. Balak could hear him tearing her dress as he rounded the corner. The man thrust himself against her, and she sobbed.
Leave her,
Balak threatened, pulling the man from the girl.
What's it to you? Or do you want to taste my rod, too?
The man asked, picking up his dagger.
Leave the poor thing alone,
Balak insisted.
Why don't you wait in your corner, bumlicker?
The man slurred, lunging at Balak. With one short punch, Balak knocked him to the ground. The girl looked at Balak, obviously scared, and began speaking rapidly in Laverian. She extended her arms, offering him coins.
I don't need anything from you,
Balak tried to explain. The girl cried as she took off back up the alley, trying to cover herself with her torn rags. Arda was practicing with her spear when Balak arrived.
Where have you been?
She asked him. She wiped her arm across her forehead. She was extremely agitated, and her cheeks were pink and warm.
Out!
His facial expression was frozen. He didn't react to her question in his usual way.
I know that. I want to know where you are going. That is so important that you have to leave us alone.
Calm down. You were safe.
Are we leaving today?
He yawned.
We paid for a week.
And then?
Keep your voice down. We have a long journey ahead. You're exhausted. This seems like a safe place.
It was made longer by us coming here, south, out of our way. What are we really doing here?
Resting.
I know you're lying to me, Balak. You've been talking to the local, visiting houses. You're searching for something, or someone.
And how do you know all that?
I followed you.
Why do I find that hard to believe? Balak questioned. I think I would have noticed you.
Then either you're getting too old to notice, or I'm getting better at staying hidden.
The next morning, Balak returned to the tavern before it opened. He saw Rousseau leave the brothel, possibly for the very first time since he spoke to her. She made eye contact with him and headed in his direction. She sat next to him on a rock and started,
My girls and I are very grateful for what you did last night.
Don't mention it,
He paused.
Does this mean I can sit inside?
Russo laughed.
Not with that gnarly thing,
she said, pointing at his axe. She stood up and started walking away, and then stopped, turned around to face Balak, and asked,
"Are you coming?"
I am not in the mood to walk.
You don't wish to accompany a beautiful lady on her walk?
Balak groaned, rose to his feet, and rushed to catch up with Russo.
Where are we going?
Nowhere in particular. Can't we just enjoy the weather? Does walking always mean we are headed toward something?
Or trying to distance ourselves from something?
Are you trying to be a contrarian, or is this really how you always talk?
Balak was silent.
Don't worry. You don't have to answer that question. Is Marie the only thing keeping you here?
Yes.
I get that you wouldn't be staying with us for long, then. Shame. You're starting to grow on me. You're not the man I imagined.
Russo stopped next to an old house in a place Balak didn't even know existed.
I'll leave you here. I've done my part.
She fixed Balak's cape before heading off. He took a deep breath and headed to the door. It opened before his hand touched the wood.
Are you Balak? Russo said you would be coming,
a young woman asked.
I was told you have important information about my family.
Balak was pleased to find another person whom he could understand without a translator. The girl looked thin, pale, and weak. Balak felt sorry for her.
I do,
he answered.
I knew your father.
You did?
I'm sorry to say he was recently murdered,
Balak said.
Murdered?
She gasped, falling on her chair.
By the Maker! Oh, no!
Her face turned paler, and her eyes filled with tears.
Georgi was my friend. At times he was my only friend. You meant the world to him, and I promised to find you and give you his message.
But there is one thing I don't quite understand.
And what's that?
Who is Georgi?
Georgi? Your father. Are you not Marie?
Yes, Marie Kardav, the daughter of Nestor Kardav. Weren't you looking for me?
Balak slapped his own head, pushed his fingers over it, and got up to leave.
Wait, what about my father?
She asked. Balak left without saying another word.
I'm ready to leave,
Balak announced upon his return to the farm.
Good. I was thinking we should go to the market and stock up before we leave, Arda said.
Balak accompanied her, but was lost in his thoughts and was even quieter than usual. His look was sad and solemn, and his face appeared gaunt. Arda had noticed how little he had been sleeping. She stocked up on supplies, buying some fresh cloth, a square of fur, and threads. Arda looked for food that she could carry, like dried rice and beans. She also bought some spices, 2 small tomatoes, and garlic.
I take it that you did not do what you wanted to do?
Arda inquired.
No.
I'm sorry to hear that. I can see it was important to you.
They walked in silence for some time before Arda said,
Come with me.
She pulled up her hood and set off along the road. Balak followed. She made a sharp turn along a thin walkway between buildings and arrived at a tavern. From his searches, Balak recognized this area of town. He must have passed it a dozen times.
The person you are looking for lives behind that door, she told him.
But how? How do you know?
You were looking in the right places, but asking the wrong questions. Now, go, talk to her.
Arda stayed behind as Balak walked up to the house. There were some flowers in a pot by the window. The windows were clean but open, and he could hear a woman's voice inside. Balak knocked at the door, and silence fell inside the house. Cautiously, a girl opened the door.
"Greetings,"
Balak said.
"Hello,"
the woman replied. Balak stared at her. Her facial features reminded him of Georgi.
"Can I help you?"
she asked.
"I am looking for a woman by the name of Marie."
"I am Marie. And who might you be?"
"My name is Balak, and I have something important to tell you. May we speak inside?"
"I am sorry. My husband doesn't like strangers in the house while he is away."
"I understand, but I come on behalf of Georgi Kardav."
"My father?"
Marie swung open the door, and Balak entered the house. He bent over so as not to hit his head on the door. Marie's hair was neat and braided, so it stayed out of her face, and he could see her narrowed eyes glaring at him. Balak sat at the dining table and looked around the house.
"Would you like some tea? Maybe something to eat?"
"No, I am not hungry,"
Balak said.
"I didn't know my father had friends. How long have you known him?"
"We were close. He kept me company for many years. He was a kind man. He talked at length about you."
"Then you must have known him a lot better than I ever did. He left us when I was just a kid."
"I am aware of that. That is all he could ever talk about."
"Did my father ever tell you why he left us?"
"Yes, he left to protect you."
"Protect?"
Marie chuckled.
"That is not the word I would use to describe it. He ran away to save his own skin. I don't know what kind of lies my father fed you, but he is not the man you knew. He was a drunk, and when he wasn't drinking, he used to spend his time gambling and squandering what little he could earn. And that's when he was sober. Growing up, I watched him beat my mother. The only time my father stopped gambling was when he had nothing left to lose. Naively, he thought the bounty hunters would chase him. Him leaving was the best thing that ever happened to us. That is, until they started harassing a single mother and her daughter. My mother worked herself into an early grave, repaying debts that never seemed to reduce. When she died, they said it was up to me to pay. When she was still around, my mother wanted me to escape and leave. She knew they wouldn't go after me, but I was afraid of what she'd do if she didn't have me. So I stayed. They offered me a way out. I married the son of the man Georgi owed the most money. Not out of love, but because I had to, if I wanted to wipe the debt clean. He isn't a kind man, but I've learned to love him over time. My life hasn't gone in the direction I had hoped."
"I'm sorry for your hardships, and I'm not good at things like this. I know it might not mean much, but your father, he thought about you every day. At times the thought of you was the only thing standing between him and a rope around his neck. He kept hidden the letters he wrote to you daily. I think he wanted you to have this."
Balak put the amulet on the table and turned to leave. Marie stood with her arms crossed, facing Balak. He closed the door behind him. He thought he heard Marie begin to sob, but he could have easily confused it with the wind or the drops of rain on the roof. Balak walked over to Arda, who was waiting for him outside. She was looking over her shoulder into the distance as if searching for someone.
"Are we being followed?"
he asked.
"What? No, I thought I saw someone familiar," she said. "How did it go?"
"Oh, could have been worse, I suppose,"
he replied coldly.